The Lima Agreement was signed in 1975 by the then Foreign Minister, Senator Don Willacy. No, not him. Him. It was a UN policy in an effort to redistribute around 25% of manufacturing to the poorer Third World nations. The UN was then to establish markets for these Third World nations so that we could buy back from these nations. So in theory, we should have around 75% of our manufacturing still in country. Sounds pretty good, right? Since this declaration was signed some 45 odd years ago, Australia has lost most of its major manufacturing industries. Certainly not just 25%. Where we were a first world nation with strong manufacturing and very promising outlook, we are now a nation who sells our nation by the truckload, sells our farms and buys everything from overseas. How did that happen? Table deals with successful Liberal and Labor governments who create legislation to allow these deals to take place. So for the past 50 years, these two major political parties have gotten fat off your taxes, the billionaires influence them through special councils and groups so that they can make their big profits, and our swamp just keeps selling off our land to foreign ownership so the parties can make themselves look good for the next election.
After almost a century, Australia will no longer produce reams of white paper. The move to cease production has blindsided hundreds of workers who stand to lose their jobs.
I saw this as my career. I would have stayed here till I retired.
So I was sort of following in his footsteps.
It's whole families losing their jobs, their finances.
It's a job handed down through the generations. A well-trodden path with the promise of a paycheck for life.
My dad retired here with 41 years of service. My granddad worked here for a number of years as well, so I'm third generation. When you got the job here, you seeing this as a job into retirement.
I introduce myself to these people the day they start and basically tell them that they have careers here. We've got barely a person leaves this place once they start.
But hundreds could be forced to leave as the last of our white paper production ends in Australia.
With me being probably one of the last ones in, I will be the first one out, sadly.
You just don't know when your last pay packet is.
Come the end of January, the last batch of Aussie-made white paper will leave Victoria's Maryvale mill, and with it spell the end of the line for 200 workers.
We will grow forests here or plantations. We will chip it and send it overseas for them to make white paper and send it back to us.
It should never have come to this.
Opal Australian paper, bought by a Japanese company 13 years ago, sits in the Latrobe Valley and has been a lifeline for employment in the region since 1937. It's Australia's last manufacturer of A4 copy paper, and these guys, the very last workers to produce it on Aussie soil.
On the 23rd was the last at 4 a.m. Yeah, so essentially we've already made our last batch of paper.
A signed copy by the crew, the final reel date stamped with a message to the machine that's been switched off for good.
I think we all just want to keep our jobs, yeah.
For the nation, it means we import all white paper, so all copy paper for businesses, prescriptions, receipt books, everything will have to be imported.
Stacey Sawyer works in the converting room, and so did her dad.
My dad retired here, he got 44 years here, helped us support us as a family, and I'm barely 2 years in and we could all just be, out of work.
Jeremy Holt worked 3 shifts before learning his future at the mill had ended.
Finally got a position out here and it's kind of been pulled out from under my feet.
And after 12 years of shift work, Justin Flenley never saw this day coming.
It just doesn't seem like they're fighting to keep production going like we are for our jobs.
They're 3 of an estimated 200 staff, contractors and trades expected to lose their jobs. Anthony Pavey at the CFMEU has been working with Opal to protect staff, but says 37 workers have already been stood down, some given just a day's notice.
The workers are the ones that are losing out here. Opal will move on, big business.
Mr Pavey anticipates that by the end of January, 120 staff will have clocked off for the last time. In a statement, Opal says it has been working to address the current shortfall in VicForest's supply of timber, and to date has been unable to identify viable alternative sources of wood. This comes after VicForest was found to have breached environment laws by failing to protect endangered wildlife before logging. VicForest has appealed the recent Supreme Court decision, but timber supply has inevitably slowed.
The company will run the argument that it's commercially unviable, but the timber supply was legislation and government should have been delivering it to us to the doorstep.
The Victorian government says it's seeking options to address timber supply, but the union argues timber is ready and waiting.
There are other timber sources in Victoria that we could be looking at now to take.
There's one thing we learned from COVID is you can't rely on international supply chains. You have to make things in your own country.
Local federal member for Gippsland, Darren Chester.
Most of our reserves, most of our forests are locked up and can't be harvested, and that's the right thing to do. But we also should be harvesting in a sustainable way those other areas of forest which have been harvested in the past. This is a bizarre situation where you're going to shut down a viable industry and replace it with imports.
The community in the Latrobe Valley acutely aware of what's to come. They've seen it all before.
This is an absolute kick in the guts to the Latrobe Valley. Our community's already suffered through the closure of the Hazelwood Power Station and the impending closure of the Yallourn Power Station as well.
As for the future of staff, Opal says no longer-term decisions on operational changes have been made. But for workers already out of work, the writing is on the wall.
There's a lot of guys just don't know where their future lies. Like, do they start looking for jobs now? Do they still hold a job?
Both Jeremy and Justin have been stood down on full pay as they await news on their futures.